All right. Good afternoon, family. I'm got a thought on my mind. I wanted to drop. Just leaving a homegoing celebration for one of my relatives. So it's kind of why I appear the way I do. But I got a thought I want to drop concerning Black history and the problem with leaving out the Bible. The problem with leaving out the Bible when we're talking about Black history. All right. So I listen to a lot of people, historians, talk. I read a lot of information, and of course I study the Bible. With me, everything goes back to the Bible. But in studying the Bible, it caused me to understand who the people of the Bible are. So this takes us, and they would be what we would call African people. All right. But when I study African history, and I listen to different scholars, great men, talking about African history. Let me put this cruise control on. So when I listen to these great men talking about African history, and they leave the Bible out, it's a problem. I mean, great men that I read a lot of their information and listen to a lot of their lectures. Great men that I highly respect, like the late Dr. Amos Wilson, the late Dr. John Henry Clark, the late Asa Hilliard, even Anthony Browder, the late Dr. Francis Krelsing. The list goes on and on. People who, even the late Dr. Sebi. The list goes on and on of people who had a lot of good information, but one common denominator that I've seen in all of them, great men, I'm not taking nothing from them, but with me, I understand that there's not one person on the earth that you're going to agree 100% with everything that they say. So you have these great men who have a lot of good information, but there's one, like I said, there's one common denominator in all of them, is that they don't believe, they leave the Bible out of Black history, and this is a problem. So I was watching something, and a young brother asked one of these African historians a question, right? He asked him, he said, I'm not going to say who he asked because I don't want to, but he asked this great man, who's, great man, he asked him a question. He said, so we were kings and queens, we did a lot of great things. He said, what happened that caused us to go into slavery if we were so great? And a lot of our young people or a lot of people, period, have that question. We were so great, what happened? And the guy who he was talking to, he didn't really deal with the gist of the question. He kind of dealt with some sidebar issues. He made some good points though. He said that when you talk about kings and queens, that was only like 5% of us were actually kings and queens. The rest of us were support people, you know, carpenters and, you know, artists and, you know, just great people, but we weren't, everybody was not kings and queens. You know, so, you know, and that was true. But he never dealt with the brother's question. What happened? You know, and he said, well, he did say that, you know, trying to make the point that our history didn't begin in slavery, so when they make you think that, they're lying to you. And that's true, but he still didn't deal with the question of, if we were so great, why did we go into slavery? See? And this is the problem when you leave the Bible out. He said we messed up because I can't remember what he said. It wasn't really something, you know, that you can really just hold on to. But the reason that we went into slavery was because we were disobedient. Right? We were disobedient to God's word. We were disobedient, and God told us that we were going to go into slavery. Deuteronomy 28th chapter explains all of that. Read it. The first 14 verses talks about the blessings that God would give us if we did what he said. Verses 15 through 68 are the curses that God said would come upon his people if they didn't do what he said. And you read verses 16 through 68, and it describes us to a T. Now, another problem with leaving out black history, well, we're leaving the Bible out of black history. They all, when you study, when you're listening to an African or somebody who's studying African history, Egypt history, Kemet, you know, talking about Kemet, ancient Kemet, they talk about the Bible as if white people wrote it. And they come from the perspective, and people do this, they come from the perspective of, I grew up in church. This is what they say. I grew up in church. I came up in church. You know, so I know all about church. We went to church every night, whatever. Well, the problem with that is that's their experience. That's their experience. Everybody has different experiences, and this is a problem when people try to make their experience in church everybody's experience, because everybody's experience is not the same. You know, it's just not. So they were taught in church that Jesus was white, God was white, everybody in the Bible was white. And so when they start learning who they are, like their true African history, then it becomes real easy to push all that away and be like, well, them people lied to us. You know, that's not our book. That's a bunch of mess that the Jewish people made up. Well, the problem with that is there's some people over in West Africa today who are descendants of the biblical Hebrews. They are African people, African by ethnicity. See, Hebrew is not a race. Hebrew is not an ethnicity in the Bible. I know they've made it an ethnicity. They've made Hebrew an ethnicity in this culture, but in the Bible, a Hebrew was a descendant of Abraham. That's not a race. That's not an ethnicity. That's a family, right? I always ask the question. So God told Abraham to leave his people in Genesis 12:1, or Genesis 12:1 and 2. God told Abraham to leave his people. So I always ask the question. God told Abraham to leave his people, and Abraham was the first Hebrew according to Genesis 14:13. Genesis 14:13 is the verse that calls Abraham the Hebrew. It's the first time we see the word Hebrew in the Bible. So God told Abraham to leave his people in Genesis 12. What ethnicity was Abraham's family that he left? What was Abraham's family's ethnicity? Abraham was the first Hebrew. A Hebrew denoted a spiritual covenant with God. God made a covenant with Abraham. That covenant was spiritual. It wasn't nothing. God didn't change Abraham's skin color or create a new ethnicity. God just made a spiritual covenant. The covenant was spiritual, right? It was spiritual. So Hebrew didn't have nothing to do with ethnicity. So I always ask the question, what ethnicity was Abraham's family that he left? All right, they were Hebrew. Well, God called Abraham the first Hebrew. God told Abraham to leave his family. And God said, I'm going to create a new nation with you. Now, I'm kind of all over the place here, but there's so many different issues that we need clarified. So I'm going to park the thing with the Abraham's family, and we're going to talk about a nation for a minute, and we're going to come back to Abraham's family. So a nation in the Bible was not an ethnicity. I know we've been taught that. a nation was an ethnicity, but the Bible does not confirm that a nation is an ethnicity. There are places in the Bible that uses the word nation, and we have made it to mean ethnicity. But the Bible don't say that a nation was an ethnicity. The Bible told God told Abraham, I'm going to make of you a great nation. God told Rebekah in Genesis 25:23, two nations are in your womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from you. We know that the word nation is translated from the Hebrew word goy, G-O-W-Y, and the Greek word ethnos. So because the word nation is translated from the Greek word ethnos, and we say that's where we get the word ethnicity from, we just chalk it off that a nation is an ethnicity, because we're going off the Greek translation, a Greek word. But a nation in the Bible was not an ethnicity. A nation in the Bible was the largest unit of a family. Joshua 7:14 explains when Israel lost a war to Ai, and Joshua didn't understand why they lost. God told Joshua, I'm just making this quick, God told Joshua that there was sin in the camp. And he told Joshua how to find the person who committed the sin in the camp of Israel. And so Joshua 7:14 is where God instructed Joshua to go. He's talking about the nation of Israel, go through the nation of Israel. And he's telling Joshua how to find one person. So he said, go through the nation of Israel, and he said, go tribe by tribe, and in the tribes you're going to go clan by clan, and in the clans you're going to go family by family. King James version calls it household by household, but NIV says family by family. And then in the household, you're going to go individual, go to the individual. That's a nation. A nation is made up of tribes, which are made up of clans, which are made up of households, which are made up of individuals. But they're all family. 1 Samuel 10:18 through 21 was when Israel wanted a king like the other nations. God wanted to be their king, but they wanted to be like the other people. So God granted them their wish. And so God was telling Samuel, I think it was Samuel, how to find this new king. And so he told him to go tribe of Benjamin, the clan of, I can't think of the name, and in the household of Kith, I think it was. And they were looking for Saul, King Saul, but they couldn't find him. But I'm just saying, they broke down what a nation is. So that's two places in the Bible that actually tells you what a nation is. It's the largest unit of a family. You got an individual, then you have your household, which is your immediate family, kind of grandparents, and then households together, the siblings of the eldest of the household, all of them together and their families, households make up a clan. And then the siblings of the eldest of the clans together, all the clans together make up a tribe. And then the tribes together make up a nation, but they're all family. This is the Bible, right? So I'm just saying, a nation is not an ethnicity, not in the Bible. You won't find it. Everybody, the Canaanites were descendants of Canaan. Egyptians were descendants of Mizraim. Everybody in the Bible was a descendant of somebody. Okay? They try to make it to be like this culture, like our culture, where everything is about race, but they didn't look at race. There wasn't no other ethnicities, wasn't no other races in the Bible. Everybody in the Bible, there are no straight-haired people in the Bible. You can't show me one straight-haired person in the Bible. People in the Bible had locks, dreadlocks, what we call dreadlocks. King Solomon had them. Ezekiel had them. Samson, of course, has had them. And Samson's locks, because people get confused and they think that locks were these neat coily people, these neat coil-like things that the people over in Israel have. But biblical locks was not a hairstyle. It wasn't a hairstyle. It wasn't something that they manipulated their hair to do. Numbers chapter 6, verse 5, where God was instructing his people through Moses, instructions on taking the vow of a Nazirite. In Numbers 6 and 5, they was supposed to they couldn't do a lot of things, Nazirite. But the end of verse 5 says, they shall be holy and shall let the locks of the hair of their head grow. Just let them grow. The point is, God said just to let them grow. There's no implication of anybody in the Bible manipulating their hair to do anything. They just let it grow. It wasn't a hairstyle, right? It wasn't a hairstyle. So the idea of locks was not something that you made your hair, you manipulated your hair to do. We can manipulate our hair to be straight. You can manipulate your hair to do anybody. Anybody with any texture of hair can manipulate their hair to lock up. But in the Bible, they just let it grow. They just let it grow. And in Judges chapter 16, it says that Samson's whole head of hair, his whole head of hair when it was in only 7 locks. Read it. It says it's only in 7 locks. His whole head of hair was in only 7 locks. Those locks had to be huge for his whole head of hair being only 7 locks. So I'm just saying, there were no straight-haired people in the Bible. There were no different ethnicities in the Bible. A nation in the Bible was the largest unit of a family. Right, so let's go back to Abraham now. So God told Abraham to leave his family, right? To leave his family in Genesis 12, 1 and 2. So what ethnicity, not lineage? Because people are quick to say, well, he was a Shemite. Well, a Shemite is a lineage, it's not an ethnicity. And that's another thing we've been tricked up on. And see, this is the problem when you leave the Bible out of black history, because you don't deal with all of these nuances. Because of whatever happened in your church. But, see, okay, let me just say this. We have all these different ethnicities now, today. And so people have made the effort, they've tried hard to explain the different ethnicities. So we know that civilization, we know that life began in Africa. Okay, let me stop right there. I'm all over the place. Let me deal with this Shemite thing first, and then we'll go back to that. So Abraham was a Shemite. Shemite is not an ethnicity, it's a lineage. Right? It's a lineage. Shem was a person, and his descendants were called Shemites. That's not an ethnicity, that's a lineage. So we're taught, a lot of us were taught, that Noah had 3 sons of 3 different races, which is not true. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. The Bible don't say that Noah had 3 sons of 3 different races. The Bible don't say that nowhere. That was conjured up to justify slavery and the slave trade. That was conjured up, that came from the Babylonian Talmud that actually said that Ham was cursed black. But that whole idea of Noah having 3 sons of 3 different races is nowhere in scripture or history. What the Bible does confirm, and what all theologians, historians, Bible scholars, preachers, they all agree, I call this our common denominator, they all agree only on the ethnicity of 1 son of Noah. Bible scholars, historians, theologians, preachers agree on the ethnicity of only 1 son of Noah, which is Ham. They all agree that Ham was an African. There's a conversation about Shem and Japheth, what ethnicity they were. But they all agreed that Ham was an African. Why? Well, for one, Ham's name, Quam in Hebrew, means hot or burnt. The continent of Africa, when you look up ancient maps of the continent of Africa, it was originally called Ham. The continent of Africa was called Ham. Ham had a son named Cush, right? The Greeks called the Cushites Ethiopians. The word Ethiopian in the Greek means scorched face, or to appear to be scorched. That's really what it means. But it means burnt face or scorched face, right? That's in Strong's Concordance G128. You look up the word Ethiopian, it means scorched face. Ham had another son named Mitzrayim. The word, so Ham had another son named Mitzrayim. The Greeks called Mitzrayim Egypt. But they called themselves Kim, which could be Cam or Kam, Ham's Hebrew name. But anyway, but they called themselves Kim. They called their land Kemet. They didn't call themselves Egyptians. The Greeks called them Egyptians. The Greeks called the Mitzrayimites, who was Ham's sons, Egyptians. Well, the ancient Greek historian, who they call the father of history, Europeans call the father of history. He wasn't the father of history, but the Europeans call him the father of history. He's a Greek father of history. He's the father of history to them. He wrote in his work called Histories that he saw the Egyptians. He saw the Egyptians. This was like in 500 BC. And he said the Egyptians were dark-skinned with woolly hair. Africans, right? Those were Ham's sons. So the Greeks called the Cushites Ethiopians. There's no doubt what an Ethiopian looks like, a true Ethiopian. Not these mixed ones, I'm talking about the true Ethiopians or Africans. And the ancient historian Herodotus described the ancient Egyptians as dark-skinned with woolly hair. And we know the ancient Egyptians and all of the ancient artifacts, the tombs, King Tut, all of them, they were Africans, nappy hair Africans. So Ham, I'm just making the point. There's a common agreement that Ham was an African, but he's the only one that they agree on, because he's the only one with proof of his ethnicity. So Ham, we know the ethnicity of one person in the family, in Noah's family. We know that Ham was an African. Well, I always say, if you know the ethnicity of one person in any family, you know the ethnicity of the family. It's not complicated. Ham was an African, so it was an African family. Now, what's crazy about the whole idea of Noah having 3 sons of 3 different races, okay, people say, well, you know, you can have, there are people who have, you know, black families who had a white child. I say, well, yeah, there are fluke cases. There are fluke cases in everything, right? There are exceptions to everything. But check this out. So there are fluke cases where a black family had a white child. But you ain't never seen no fluke case, even a fluke case, to where a black family had a white child and a Chinese child, where there was 3 different races, not just 2, 3 different races in one family. You ain't never seen it. Not when the parents were the same ethnicity. And there's no indication in the Bible that Noah's wife with any different ethnicity. There's just nothing there. People can assume all they want, but there's nothing to indicate that anybody was any other ethnicity except for African, what we call African. So, if you know the ethnicity of one person in the family, you know the ethnicity of the family. Ham was an African, so his brothers Shem and Japheth had to be Africans also. Yes, Japheth was an African. Many of Japheth's descendants today are Europeans, but Japheth himself was an African. There are actually African in history. There are actually African Japhethites, right? Japheth himself was an African. It was an African family. Shem was an African. Ham was an African. You know, that's the only sense you can make out of that. So, what ethnicity was Abraham's family that he left? Well, he was a descendant of Shem, the African, because he was Ham's brother. He was a Shemite. Well, like I said, Shemite is not an ethnicity. So me and my brother have children. Okay? Now, first of all, I've got a brother and a sister. Our parents were the same ethnicity. So you see me, you see what ethnicity I am. You know what ethnicity my brother and sister are. I don't even have to tell you. You're not thinking that they were Chinese or white or European or East Asian or whatever. They were black, what we call African American, so-called African American. So my brother and I have children. So my children are my lineage. His children are his lineage. But we're all the same ethnicity. Different lineages, one ethnicity. This was a mess that was fed to us through slavery. But when you really dissect and understand the Bible, there are no other ethnicities in the Bible except for what we call African. There are only lineages, descendants, everybody in there. Syrians, people get twisted up on that word Syrian, but Syrian was a descendant. When you look up the Strong's, when you look up the words and where they come from, the word Syrian is a descendant of, I think, Aram, I believe it is. It's a descendant. It's not. You can't go by the people today. That'll take you down a different rabbit trail. It won't have you in truth.